Hello, friends. I'm RJ, and I'm currently being stabbed in the ear.
And I'm Manny.
And welcome to Really Dicey. Please like and subscribe as we talk today about Knights of Arthurian legend.
Chaosium was kind enough to send us an early copy of the Pendragon Starter Set. The Pendragon role-playing game was created by the late, great Greg Stafford, and the game has been around for decades. And I'm excited to review this because I've always been a fan of the King Arthur mythology. This box set is set up similarly to other Chaosium starter sets. It has 3 books, dice, 8 pre-generated character sheets, appendices, and battle cards. Let's talk about the most apparent thing you will notice immediately, the amazing thematic art style of this starter set. Arthurian fans will be happy to see that everything from certain fonts to maps do a great job to convey the feeling of the time period, while also feeling modern at the same time. I mean, I'll show here the covers of some of the books and the starter set itself. It's a great blend of old school and new school styles, in my opinion. So let me show you clips of an unboxing I made with this product. But before I start that, I want to share something. This starter box, is about a 3/4 inch or 2 centimeters thick. I hope you can see that in this video. Now, the latest Dungeons and Dragons starter set is about 1.5 inches or 4.5 centimeters thick. And yet, there's definitely a weight difference with the Pendragon starter set. It weighs more, and to me, that's definitely a good sign. My favorite things about this starter set is the design of the character sheets and battle cards. I know these were meant to be used, these character sheets, but these are designed so well. I would rather keep these as pristine as possible and then make photocopies from the digital versions. The battle cards are also a helpful tool. No longer do you have to waste time finding stats for NPCs at the last minute or use up your limited number of bookmarks.
Yeah, the character sheets are pretty well designed, and you can see what's important in the game by how much real estate they get on the sheet, right? So, combat, for example, is only a third of the sheet, and skills and traits, as you can see, are very important. But we'll say more about that when we get to rules.
Book one. I really like that Chaosium includes solo adventure books in their starter sets. They've done the same for Call of Cthulhu and the RuneQuest starter sets. And as a fan of the old Choose Your Adventure and Endless Quest books, these are great to play. Book one is called The Adventure and the Sword in the Stone. So for those of you who are not familiar with the solo adventure series, it's a story you read and play along with, and you'll be asked to roll dice to resolve situations. And depending what you roll, you go to a different chapter in the story that will lead to a certain ending. It's replayable, and by rolling dice at certain challenges, it is also a fantastic way of learning the system. And the adventure you play here is tied to the mini campaign in book 3. RJ, well, what you think of book 2, the Fabled Realm, which is pretty much the rules booklet?
Yeah, well, let's take a look at the basic mechanics. For dice, the system uses one 20-sided dice and six or so six-sided dice. The d6s are used for damage rolls. Everything else uses the 20-sided dice. So for unopposed rolls, such as seeing what's making that sound in the grass, you pick a skill to use, for example, awareness, and it will have a value between 0 and 20. So let's say your skill has a value of 8. You roll a d20, and if you roll less than the skill's value, then it's a success. If you roll exactly the skill's value, an 8 in this case, it's a critical success. And if you roll higher than the skill's value, then you fail. And if you roll a natural 20, it's a fumble. So it might look like you want to roll low in this game, which is a bit counterintuitive if you've mostly played games that reward rolling high numbers. But it's not quite true that rolling low is good. So let's take a look at opposed rolls next. Opposed rolls are used when two characters are competing for different outcomes. Tug of war, for example, or any sort of combat, including rap battles. So both parties roll a d20 and compare the result to their own skill value. If they both succeed, that is, they roll equal or lower to their own skill value, then the person with the highest number wins. So, similar to blackjack, you want to get the highest number without going over your skill's value. So, roll high, but not too high. There's more going on here, such as critical successes beat successes, and the fact that both people could fail, resulting in a mutual failure. So, game masters, be ready to narrate critical successes successes, partial successes, and mutual failures. It has more variety, but it keeps you on your creative toes. Taking a look at a character's 5 main characteristics, you can see some choices were made in this game design. The characteristics are size, dexterity, strength, constitution, and appeal. So size is the character's relative height and weight compared to others, and it determines your resistance to being knocked down and is a factor in the amount of damage you deal, your total hit points, and your resistance to being knocked unconscious. These are all pretty important for professional fighters, so it's not a surprise that size is first in the list. Appeal, which is like charisma, is always listed last.
Speaking of charisma, what are your thoughts on the traits and passions and how they affect character creation?
Yeah, in Pendragon, players don't have absolute control over the behavior of their characters. So, a large section of the character sheet is dedicated to describing a character's personality. These are 13 opposed traits. So, there's 26 descriptors, such as forgiving and vengeful. Each pair has a value that equals up to 20. And when one side increases, the opposite side decreases. So normally these simply act as a guide for players, but sometimes you use a trait roll, that is rolling against a specific trait, to determine a character's behavior. This might be to decide what a character does in a key moment or when a virtue is being tested. Characters also have passions, such as loyalty to companions, love for a person, or devotion to a deity. And when the subject of these passions is in play, the character may become impassioned, gaining additional bonuses to other skills for a time, like fighting more fiercely to defend their loved one. And then there are scoring systems for gaining and losing both honor and glory.
We could make a whole video about combat in Pendragon, but what are some of the things that stand out to you in the combat section?
Now, combat uses the opposed roles that I just described, and you look at a table to resolve the intersection of successes and failures from both combatants. Each blow you receive is recorded separately along with the damage from the blow. So each is a separate wound that has to be healed separately. There's a place on the character sheet to keep track of each hit you've taken. Knocking down opponents, breaking weapons and shields, and knocking foes unconscious is an automatic part of the system. You don't need to get special abilities or take special actions to do these things. If you hit hard enough or mishandle your weapons, these things happen. But there are a lot of actions you can choose in combat besides attack, such as call squire, defend, disarm, dodge, evade, reckless attack, withhold damage, zigzag, that's if somebody's shooting at you, set spear, and many more. And there are mounted actions like trample and mounted charge, and there are brawling actions such as slam, grapple, and escape. And the weapon choices provide more detail than just simply differences in damage. Axes, for example, wear down and break shields. Long weapons can keep opponents at bay, and swords break other weapons.
Did you like the rules about character advancement? It's definitely different from other fantasy systems.
Yeah, on the character sheet, there are experience checkboxes next to each skill, trait, and passion. And you check the box when you roll a critical success or a fumble, because you learn from failure, or when the game master decides you should because it's a key achievement. And every year ends with the winter phase, which is downtime. This is when characters advance. So during the winter phase, for every experience checkmark that's checked, the player rolls a 20-sided dice. If the roll is higher than the current value of that skill or trait, then they advance it by adding 1 to it. So they've learned something. Then they also get one more advancement of their choosing. Everybody gets one. There are 5 options to choose from, ranging from training multiple skills to adding 1 to any characteristic. So maybe they get bigger. And then finally, you add up your glory and choose prestige awards for every 1,000 glory. And this can be used to add 1 to any statistic. So skill advancement is pretty important. So the way to advance the most is to get those experience checks in the skills you want to advance. That means having a generous game master or rolling those magic numbers when you're making those rolls, fumbles or critical successes, and then rolling well during the winter phase to actually get the advancement. Since there's a lot of randomness in this process, you might have some players' characters advance more than others and end up with a weaker and stronger characters in the party, which can be an unfun situation. I think this is a risk with this design, and game masters should keep an eye out for this.
Book 3, The Sword Campaign, details the setting of the game. The setting is based on Arthurian lore, and the game assumes that you know what that is, which is great because I didn't want to reread the lore all over again. Instead, it focuses on the time period from a historical standpoint. For example, you may know about Merlin and Lancelot, but do you know about the history of London and how it got its name? Now, anyone who buys the starter set should know that this book is really for game masters only, book 3. So I won't share the adventures with Finn, but the booklet does a great job in giving game masters the perspective of the times and culture. There are also maps of the locations your players will be venturing in, but most of this book is written information of the campaign and local lore. Personally, I think the strongest feature of the lore in this game is that it's not bound to one source. Whether you prefer Thomas Mallory's version or Marion Zimmer Bradley's version of the Arthurian myths, you can tailor that perspective with the information in this book, giving your game its own unique feel. Some of you learning about the Pendragon Starter Set for the first time are probably thinking, okay, so what makes this different from other fantasy RPG systems? I mean, you can't make a setting like this in D&D, for example. And it's true. You can play your own version of mythical Britain in D&D and other fantasy systems, but D&D is high fantasy with lots of magic and fantastic monsters. So you, as the game master, will have to do a lot of changes with the rules, being that this is a low magic setting, very low magic. But what makes Pendragon Starter Set or Pendragon role-playing game unique is that, like most Chaosium books, they do a great job in giving you the best information of this part of history and location, and give it to you in a way for you not only to understand it, but make it real for your players. Also, while alignment in D&D and Pathfinder are, honestly to me, no longer that necessary, and at times you're just making sure your players don't turn into murder hobos, the rules for traits, passions, honor, and glory, for example, help elevate your characters and the setting. This is a world that is falling into darkness, and the world needs knights to help bring hope to people and heal these regions. This box set does a great job with balancing tone, and what I mean by that is this feels like a game I can play with fans of Arthurian legends or people who want to do some serious role playing. But I can see this also as a great learning tool for children, and I think kids would get a kick out of this. I mean, I know I would have decades ago.
Yeah, the basic rules are straightforward enough, but they start to get a little finicky when you get into the details. So skills don't actually max out at 20, but anything above 20 is treated as a critical bonus. Then there's the bonus, and then there's the concept of reflexive modifiers that give an equal but opposite bonus slash penalty on two opposed parties, such as a +5 to one and a -5 to the other. And then like the average movement rate for humans is 1.6 yards per second, also converted to 3.2 miles per hour in case that helps. So I wouldn't say this is an elegant design, and game masters are going to need to be able to quickly reference the rules. However, the system of traits is an interesting way to reinforce character personality as part of the rules and to reward players for playing to their character traits. The random nature of trait rolls, however, could result in a loss of player agency and should probably be used very sparingly. I like some of the touches to the combat system, though, like falling unconscious from big hits, wearing down shield protection with axes, and breaking weapons. I think it adds a sense of brutal melee to combat, which serves this setting really well. There are more rules for full battles, and that really brings the feel of medieval battlefields to life. I think that's the sweet spot for this system, like medieval melee.
So I definitely recommend getting the Pendragon Starter Set, especially for those that love literature, history, and or especially Arthurian mythology. Seeing what is written here and the design style of this box set, I am looking forward to the new Pendragon core rulebook. So viewers, thank you for watching this video. Please like and subscribe. And remember, strange women lying in ponds distributing swords is no basis for a system of government. Take care, everyone.